All right. Daniel Griffith, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. I was listening, scrolling through Kyle Kingsbury's podcast one day, and that's kind of where I was introduced to your subject matter. Just threw it on. I was pretty fascinated, so I decided to reach out and just see what you had going on. And so before I ask you a question, if you could just give people a little bit of a background, you don't have to go too far in depth, but a little bit of your background in agriculture and writing and just kind of try to encompass a little bit of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely, Dylan. No, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I You reached out and I got to dive into some of your conversations and I enjoyed them. I'm blessed and excited about
Thank you.
what we get to do together here. Yeah, who I am, that's a big question, as it is for everybody, I guess. Yeah, really long story short, because it's kind of a it's kind of a long story and it needs to be short. I was raised up in Northeast Ohio in a homeschooling family. I was always very outdoorsy, but very athletic. And then my junior year in high school, I was diagnosed with some serious health issues that more or less ended life as I knew it. And we spent the last 15, 16, 17 years fighting those issues. And a lot of what I have surrounded myself with, a lot of my story, if you will, the things that, I don't know, have etched their way into my journey are a stem from that, a branch from that initial foundation of being very free. Like, for instance, the last math I took was my freshman year in high school. And I don't know how much you know about homeschooling, but it's very open. It's kind of like by the end of high school, you need to know some things. And as long as you know them, it doesn't really matter how you get there.
Mm-hmm.
There were things that I didn't know, to be very clear. My mom, she was raised in a very, very poor Polish immigrant community in east side of Cleveland, and barely made it through high school herself. And so as a homeschooling mom before, she only could give us so much, but what she inspired us to really make into our own was how to learn, how to love learning, how we learn. And that was something special. And then I went to college and found out I loved math. And although I only had a foundation of Algebra 1, so I didn't learn like Algebra 2 and calculus and pre-calculus and algebra, geometry and everything else. I just fell in love with math. So I studied math in college and I ended up being a TA and started to get a master's degree in math and all sorts of things. And so I kind of found what I loved there. And then that's more or less when the disease really kicked in and life changed. And we started to turn to alternative healing methods, maybe. My particular flavor of disease more or less like deteriorates my bone structures. And so I've had all my limbs taken off and I've had some exploratory surgeries and I lost the ability to walk for a while. And then spent a long time trying to learn how to walk again. And then it all turned one day, maybe 16 years ago. My mom, being the light that she is, the very simple-minded, beautiful, when I say simple, I mean really beautiful-minded person, soul that she is, she had started to investigate the idea of farming and raising our own food and, giving a damn for our environment. And maybe that pathway, that journey, that modality would lead to enhanced results that the Western medical system couldn't provide at the time. And so we got into raising chickens and we started eating healthy. And then we started to realize that whole foods are the healthiest. And then we started realizing that the best whole foods are the freshest, which also come locally. And then we started falling in love with the local farmers. And then we started falling in love with the lives of the local farmers. And we started farming ourselves. And 16 years later, whatever it is, 15, 16 years later, my wife and I, we now live in Central Virginia on about 400 acres, farming cattle, horses, goats, sheep, wild berries. We forage for the majority of our food. It's a little bit weird for a full-time farmer to say that, but we harvest all of our own meats here on farm. I'm a professional butcher. I've learned that craft over the last 15 years. I teach everybody from backyard, home scale butchers all the way to USDA facilities, how to field harvest, how to do some very particular things that a lot of controlled or systemic or really like concentrated operations don't really have to deal with. So some of the complexities with animals in a more open and more free range system. How do we harvest that meat in a sacred and ceremonial and Kincentric way is a term that we use, is both kinship and concentric, or based upon the circle of life we are in and of, and partake in the circle as much as the circle partakes in us, so that sacred, honorable process. And then we also forage. So we don't really grow vegetables. I've never really been a fan of growing vegetables. But my children and I, and then my wife, when she wants to, we forage. And so we get probably a third to a half of our daily provisions, just walking and picking stuff and eating it. And we're really good at it. It takes a particular style of life to be able to handle that particular love for seasonality and more. And and so that's really the foundation. And then out of that foundation, I started to write, agricultural books in 2017. And then we started to travel and consult in the agricultural space. And that was fun and good. And I'm sure there's a lot of things there we could talk about. And then 2 years ago, I published a book still about agriculture and ecology. It's called Stagtine, Kincentric Rewilding. And it's about half story, half science. And I started to realize that the story is more conveying of truth than the science was. And so I started to write stories, and now I write novels. And so that's more or less what's in the fore for me is fiction and novels and myth retellings and mythology, and the idea of writers being the bastard children of oral storytellers. And what does that really mean? What does that look like? What kind of weight does that carry? I don't know. I think that was as brief as I can get it.
It's a good intro. And and it seems like you're leaning into the storytelling and the fiction, as we sort of discussed a little bit. And I was curious about that because, again, having 400 acres and being involved in a number of different trades, if you will, and just sort of life paths, it's fascinating. But I do want to lean into that storytelling and fiction a little bit, because I think what you said is interesting, being a writer, being the bastard child of oral storytellers. Can you detail a little bit of how this unfolded for you, like psychologically, or was this a chosen process where you just started writing and then you got really deeper into this mythic expression? Because you have a poetic way of speaking, also a very poetic way of writing, and it weaves myth and sort of this indigenous language to an extent into it. But was this an organic unfolding? Did something psychologically happen, or is this just more of a listening, and then this is what you found deeply important? And if you can kind of elaborate on how you feel storytelling is so important to our culture and to even what you do agriculturally.
A dear friend of mine, a brother, he's a Omaha historian and storyteller. And a number of years ago, I was sitting with him, and he told me the story of his people's creation story, his story of life, and it's held in a cave. It's called Picture Cave, out in the Central Plains. His people, upon migrating out of the Mississippi River region, Ohio River region, at the confluence of the Mississippi that goes into the Missouri, there's this cave where they painted their oral stories, their ancient stories, in these deep down cave walls. It's like womb of earth, and it's like a very protected place. And he was telling me these stories, and it was a really important moment for me. I've been able to sit with a lot of people like this, and it's so interesting that a culture hundreds of thousands of years old has what it has, it knows what it has, and is good in that having, when it is all still nestled into story, into this framework of human experience told through this oral lens. And that oral lens, it's interesting. It unlike like when you pick up a book and read it, it's fluid. It's living. It requires scenery. It requires the winter hearth, that like poppling in crackling fire, right? The shadows flitting off each other's faces. All of these things matter in that story, and it becomes alive. And so to some degree, story from the oral mythological perspective, in the perspective that my friend, the Omaha man, was telling to me in his own language, in his own ways, it's grounded in its ecotone. And it also grounds the listener into that ecotone. I was in a conversation recently, and the fellow asked me, what do I believe is the myth of today, like the myth of modernity? I think the machine is a fine metaphor for it, but if you want to dive a little bit deeper, it's like the ungroundedness, this disconnectedness, the dismembering
Mm-hmm.
of our bodies from Earth, even our bodies from each other. The disconnectedness of lived environments, right? We all live in our own houses, that we all have like property boundaries around. Like we're just so disconnected, dismembered. What mythology and story does so well is to remember us. That remembering is also regrounding or rerouting.
Mm-hmm.
And so stories held in the rooted environment also then help humans become rooted. And that was something given to me then, and I've chewed on it since. And my ancestors, my mom's family are immigrants from Poland. My dad's family are immigrants very recently from Ireland. But we're so disconnected from that. Like I know where my ancestors live in Ireland, but I've never, had a conversation with them. And we're only a generation or two away from each other. And that disconnect is so interesting. There's this the chief, the Lakota chief, his name's gonna pass me in this moment. Um, yeah, yeah, his name's lost from my mind, but he looks upon there's this famous quote. He looks upon the colonial settlers in maybe the 1860s, I think, maybe early 1870s, and he says, "Why do you want our sacred places so much? Don't you have your own sacred places? Go back home and worship your sacred rivers and your sacred wells and your sacred mountains. Be there, worship that. Don't take ours."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important in the modernity, in the modern sense, as humans, especially like migrated humans, like you and I don't think we didn't ask to be here. We were just born here and we live here. For many of us, I should say, for the most of us, that's the case. And yet at the same time, we are here. And so how do we surround ourselves in like this post-colonial age with the land as invaders or colonizers or immigrants to that land, while also remembering our pasts,
Mm-hmm.
our ancient spaces, our ancient and sacred rivers, and things like this? And so the interesting thing about story is it's a two-way dream walking where both the reader and the writer, especially the writer, but definitely both, they have to participate in a feast with the ancestors. That is to say, going back in this dream walking space to dine and feast with the old ones, the long ago peoples, your ancestors, to relearn those things, right? To meet that truth, because even, if you understand the human body scientifically, we carry those memories literally within us, and it just depends if it's DNA or mitochondrial or mtDNA. It's a little bit different, and trauma is past, right? So like in the literal scientific sense, we carry those memories with us, but to meet those memories in that dream space, it's very important. And when you read a story, it's interesting, a lot of times people experience that deja vu, like I've been here before, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not literally, but thematically, spiritually, relationally, colorfully, like I recognize this space. That's that ancestral memory still living in our very colonial bodies. While at the same time, we have to dream forward. That is to say, while I might write a Irish retelling, colonial, critiquing mythology, I still also live, in Central Virginia, east side of the Appalachian Mountains, and the western side of Seneca, the land of the Monacan Siouan people, the Okanichi, the Saponi, all around, right? So like we currently live here. And so that two-way dream walking is looking backwards and understanding the ancestors, who you are, while also looking forward, finding that pathway forward in like that post-colonial age where we're not trying to like decolonize, be just not so bad colonizers, but like not colonizers at all, right? Post-colonial. A good friend of mine, Hakapitopa, he's a Glala pipe carrier. And he talks about the relearning the pre-colonial worldview or pre-Columbian worldview or concentric worldview. To some degree, I think it's obvious listening to my words. I obviously agree that that's an unbelievable importance for today, maybe the most important. But the way that that is conveyed through story, I think, is the most powerful. Because what
Mm-hmm.
stories do is they can slither into your being, they can explode you from the inside, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden you're forced to look inward. But if I hand you a nonfiction book or some scientific paper, like some people don't like to read that kind of stuff. Some people don't like to be told what to do. It's a little bit too black and white or whatever. Their minds or hearts are too closed, their eyes are too shut. But if I give you a story and you become lost in it, and at the end of the story you realize that it was just a critique of colonialism, and it exposed yourself and woke you up and startled you to seeing the realities that you had not seen before, now we can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so for all of those reasons, I've started to play with fiction, started to play with storytelling. Um, it's also very healing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Even just as a writer, it's healing to tell a story. something human there. I heard recently that the human species is the only species that fears death, and the fear of death is something that makes us very human. And I have great problems with that. I think the human species, if anything, is the human species. But if we were to be subclassified, a storytelling species, I don't think we're unique in that way, but we're very damn good at it. And so when we participate in that telling, we participate in the human experience in it, in the truest sense, right? So like even now, you and I are participating in some human experience, this conversation, this community, this yarning, this sitting together. But there's digital aspects in the way, right? There's digital technology, there's space, etc. There's time zones, whatever it might be. But when we participate in the story, it does feel, even if it's like this bastardized, mechanical, printed on page with ink, it doesn't live in an ecotone. It's not being told orally around a fire. It still has that like bastardization, but it seems more pure than any other way that we can communicate in the mode of story. And so it's been healing for us. It's been really wonderful. A lot of my stories are very ecological. I can't help it. Like the story I'm writing right now is of this horse. That's, it's very alive and, has words to say. And we have horses here and we train horses. We breed horses, all of that stuff. And so to be a part of the horse's life in that way is something very spiritual and special to us. So to be able to put that into a story and give it to people who don't get to just live in the field with horses like my family does, it's special. It's like I get to give you a gift of my soul and from my soul. Yeah.
Do you feel like you said earlier, being separate from your ancestors in Ireland and in Poland, for example, do you think that that's part of the disconnect in this country because we are such a melting pot, which I think is awesome, but do you think that that started a bit of a disconnect from the sacred and from tradition for us as a culture, let's say?
That's a really good question. I think it definitely aided to the termination of memory. Absolutely. I think a lot of the separation from humanity, the separation of humanity from, I have a friend, Mokopona of the Waitaha people, medicine carrier of the Maori down in New Zealand. She talks a lot about the idea of vakapapa. So vakapapa is the Maori word for both the lineage, the life in our own bodies being tied and tethered to the life and rootedness of our place. And so it's like kind of like that two-way dream walking that I'm talking about, but held in a very ancient sense, the idea of vakapapa. We have been removed from our vakapapa for a long time. So for instance, Ireland is very easy. Our oldest stories, really our only stories, were written by Catholic monks in 700, 800, 900 AD, written in a language that wasn't ours. We lost our indigenous language, written in a language that was of the colonizers, the Catholic monks, written in Latin, in our own mythology. The ideas were changed, the timeline is changed, the vocabulary is changed. It's clear. I mean, we have archaeological evidence that puts people in the Isles of Britain about 900,000 years ago. So like I'm talking like ancestors of Homo sapiens. But at the same time, our mythology says that we're, the first person who came to the island was the granddaughter of Noah. I can never remember these things. I don't ever care to put them to memory. But it's a Christianized, it's a Judeo-Catholic Christianized version of our ancient mythology. And so, I mean, even in the 1960s, it was illegal for an Irish person to speak Irish or Gaeilge in Ireland. And so the idea of removing people from their ancestry in order to control them is not something that happened it was not something that was created in the 1870s, 80s in the American plains, against the genocide or for the genocide of the indigenous peoples there, the Lakotas, the Nakotas, the Oseti Sakawi, everybody else. We can colonize because we've been colonized is another way of saying that. And so I think this act of remembering, not just having memory and reawakening that memory, but literally stitching ourselves back together, it has to include reawakening these ancient ancestral stories, food ways, life ways, ceremonial ways, story ways, and letting them live in a new way. I know a lot of mythologists that read the Irish mythology as if it's gospel, which doesn't make any sense to me because it literally was written in view of the gospel, the Christian gospel, and it's been changed and it's totally different. And we lost a lot, and I think that's fine. We should study it, and I have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. One of my books, The Plain of Pillars, is a retelling of what's called the Catmac Turd, or the Second Battle of Mortura. That's the anglicized version of it, or the Battle of the Plain of Pillars, I guess it could be translated as. So you study the mythology, but you have to let it dream anew. It's the idea of an oral story, right? These stories, these ancient tales, and there's aspects of certain tales that I can pull up from Irish mythology that call back to glaciation and the ice receding, which is 16, 17,000 years ago. So these stories are ancient, holding very ancient memory. But then when they were written down by the Catholic monks, they stopped, right? Their evolution, their adaptation, the mutation, the fluidity, the growth in the living idea of the term ended, right? And so when we pick it up and we do another telling, it re-becomes alive. And in that re-becoming, it also changes a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in the place, by the teller, by the, if you're burning oak instead of hickory, or, ash instead of elm, like the fire is different. The story is going to be different. The shadows on the people's faces are going to be different. Therefore, it's a new story, right? So
Mm-hmm.
every telling in an oral culture is different, and it evolves with generations. And I think allowing it to continue to evolve, like reawakening it from the ashes and then allowing it to continue to evolve, might just be medicine in the truest sense, ceremony in the truest sense, for a people like myself, a people who are not only disconnected because of genocide ourselves, but participating in a product of a genocide in another hemisphere, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so as we unpeel that and work through that, story seems to be the medium that can do the deepest work, right? The good medicine. And
Mm-hmm.
that's very exciting. There's not many other things that are exciting, I don't think. Not to me,
It's true.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that. That's just sad.
No, well, I mean, when it comes to story, just using that word, I grew up being attracted to, of course, different stories, as many people do, but it emphasized wasn't truly emphasized as what it was by school teachers or my parents. And not that they did anything incorrect, it's just they didn't grow up with story being such an important factor for them. And when I started getting more into different philosophies and reading indigenous writers and just understanding how powerful storytelling is for a culture and for people, and as medicine, and as your own personal story too, and as what you want to live out in the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell to the people that are going to come after us, and the stories we tell to a culture. It seems to be that we are made of stories. So
Yeah.
I want to understand a little bit, and this is, I have a good collection of writing, but not much that I've put out. So this is a personal question as well as a question, I'm sure, for people that are going to hear this. What's that initial process like, where you sat down to write, meaning let's say the physical practice of doing it? I don't know how that looked for you, and I'm curious. And also the process of listening and putting words to paper, and where did that process begin, and how did it begin?
Mary Oliver, she's a amazing poet.
Mm-hmm.
She has a book about how to write poetry that I read many years ago, and it affected me then. It still affects me now. And she said, in order to write a poem, which I think is to write anything, what a poet does, by the way, is it takes something so entirely common and transforms it to carry the magnificent, right? So, like, Matso Basho is a ancient poet, a particular kind of poem that, man, some things are just leaving me today. It's short and sprite. It's not a sonnet. It's not a tip-tap poem. It'll come to me, maybe later. But there's this poem. Let's see if I can. It's very short, and it says, "An old silent pond. Into the pond, a frog jumps. Splash. Silence again." There's not a single word in there that requires a dictionary. There's not
Mm-hmm.
a single comma. There's not a single parsed phrase. There's nothing confusing or complex. And yet, if you were to sit there and think about it, everything in that was living. An old silent pond. Like, we've all been there, right? Like, all of us, we've all been to something that was old and silent. Hopefully it was a pond. Water is a special place. You know, right next to the pond, a frog jumps. We've all seen this time and time and time again. But right now, we're looking at an old silent pond, just anywhere. But it's the frog jumps. And we've all seen the frog. So now our mind is particular. It's focused onto this frog. Splash. Absolutely. We see this splash, not the other splashes, not the turtle, submerging over there, the dragonflies kissing the water's top. This frog splash, then silence again. We've all felt that, right? We've all seen the frog. We've all seen it jump. We've seen the splash, and then the silence that follows. Like, that's like, to write a poem is to say something so common and humdrum and daily, but so magnificent. Like, that's what poem writing is. That's what writing is. Anyways, Mary Oliver, in talking about writing poems, she writes that the poet has not a special word or special way with words, but every day the poet sits down in the exact chair with the exact medium, pen, typewriter, computer, whatever it is, facing the same direction, and they sit there open and humble. And maybe something comes, maybe it doesn't, but every day at the same time, wearing the same clothes, facing the same direction, thinking the same thoughts, they visit and visit and visit that location time and time again. And at some point, could be today, could be a month from now, the muse visits, right? The divine, the creator, the spirit comes down, and all of a sudden the book or the poem is created. And she said, that's how we write poems. I think that's also how we write books. Not necessarily that it has to be purely a sacred process, but for me, it's a very sacred process. It's my time of dreaming. It's my morning hours. A good friend of mine builds sheds, like backyard garden sheds, and they needed cows, and I raised cows. So I gave him a cow, and he gave me a shed, and we decked it out. And now there's skulls and bones and all of my precious things in here. And in the mornings, this is when I write. And I get up in the morning at 4:30, and my eyes are just ready to go. And I get up and I read. I always read out of the genre that I'm writing. If it's nonfiction that I'll be writing, I read fiction. If it's fiction that I'm writing, right now I'm in the middle of writing a mythological horror of all things. So I'll read something else, some sci-fi or historical fiction or something, just to get my mind moving, but not necessarily moving to write, because I want to read right now. So I do that, and then I write for a while, and the sun rises in the east here, like all places, but it's right outside the window where my hand is pointing, and the sun rises through the window, and that's that process. I think as it evolves, though, it's really interesting. I have graduated. I feel like a fine writer now, because I graduated from everything that I write is worth publishing, which I feel like is a very easy concept to buy into in the beginning because you're so proud of it, to I write to find the story, and then I find the story and I write the story. And so the book that I'm writing right now, it's about 200,000 words. So that's like 600, 700 pages. But I wrote about 100-page book leading up to the story, thinking that was the story. And then as soon as I got to the end of that, like, first story, if you will, I realized that it's here that the story begins. Like, I wrote myself into the story, and I didn't delete it, because you never delete anything. But I, quote unquote, deleted that first 100 pages. And then I started writing because I found that story, right? Like, I was just visiting the muse. I was just typing. I was world building. I was just dreaming with the characters. And all of a sudden I realized that they had matured. The story had matured. The muse had finally visited. And that's where the story begins. And so to some degree, writing for me is the finding of the story. I think a lot of people, like readers especially, think that writers, and I'm sure some writers do, but I think readers think that writers sit down and we like plot it out, and then we just fill in the blanks with words. It's not at all a hero of mine. One of the greatest living writers I think alive is a guy named Stephen Graham Jones, and his book Buffalo Hunter Hunter, by the way, I think could be one of the greatest books. If you're listening to this and you want a good Buffalo Hunter Hunter, is a story of a Bukani, a Blackfoot man in the 1890s, I think, literally running around killing Napequans. He's a vampire, and he just kills Napequans, so white people. Blackfoot word for white people. It's awesome. I mean, it's so awesome.
I'll put it in the show notes because I want to revisit that myself. I have not read that book. So
it's so good. It's so good. But he says that he writes, Stephen Graham Jones, that is, in an interview he did with his publisher, Saga Press, maybe last year. He said that he writes so that he finds the story. Like, he's just Like when he's writing, he's just at the edge of his seat like you are when you're reading. Like he has no idea what's going to happen. And I so agree with that. Part of the reason that I write, part of the thing that gets me up every morning, and part of the thing that just, God, I told my wife recently that I hate writing because it's so freaking hard, because you're like so into it. But if I didn't write, I would pop. And so therefore you love writing. And it's a weird relationship you have with words, but like I have to get up. I have to know what happens to these characters. Like one of the characters in my book, his name is Carbra. And I'm dying, like right now, I'm dying to know like what happens to him. I have no idea. We're going to go find out. So you sit down and write. And so it's that realness, that like real fluidity, that like true pulse of blood through veins that just stimulates the writing of a book. And you can tell books that were overly scientific or overly linear. They're a little bit more boring. They're written to tropes. They're plot forward. You read a 300, 400 page book and it's really just garbage until that one line that you can tell they wrote the whole book for, and you're like, okay, I got it. Now I understand why they wrote the book. But like nothing else in the book was living. You can see that. And maybe the authors see it differently. Certain authors, I'm sure, do. But it's to participate in that life. Like that oral story is still there, even if we're going to put it on paper, right? So like light the fire, like bring the chairs in, invite your friends, like turn off the lights, wait for the winter season, whatever that is, like create the aura for the muse to come. And then when it comes, God, it's awesome. Not everything that you write gets published. I'll tell you that. Like the first 100 pages of the book that I'm currently writing, that's just garbage now. But it led you to the muse, like it led you to creator trying to tell the story through you. And so as that transitory power,
Yeah, I think that's the fascinating part of a lot of good artists, creators, writers is, you are sort of allowing that story to come through you. So I find that fascinating. And again, and I find it important, which at a certain time, I've always found it important, but it's funny. I do have some of that programming in our culture where it's like, if you're sitting down to write, you're not doing something. Just so that getting past that was a thing for me too, which is interesting because I didn't really think that I felt that way. And I have a lot of energy, so there's a desire to move, and I think a lot of people feel that though in our culture. And being raised in suburban New Jersey, it's very built in that there's like a do, go, kind of tackle the day. And I think that most of when I'm reading or creating art, I have to really slow down, sit with myself, and almost be able to listen and to meditate. And that kind of puts me onto a question I did want to ask. It seems that in what you're saying with storytelling, there's a lot of listening involved, of course, action while you're doing the process. You're also creating as you're going. But it seems that that's also true with some of what you've talked about and written around agriculture and the difference between I think I don't know if these are the correct words. The difference between like regenerative and rewilding, and that kinship and that relationship. Can you, if you want to say anything else about storytelling, please feel free to go on. But I did want to ask you about that because I do think they blend. So in agriculture, and in even taking the life of an animal and harvesting the animals, how do you do that? What's your perspective and thoughts around like listening and building a relationship with the land and with the animals?
Yeah. There's an absolute trace there, a bridge between the two. I think they're the same things, really. I think the human participation in death, which is all that life is, not too entirely sure. There's the heart of a line between living and dying. If you participate in agriculture, if you're ecological at all, in the observant view of the thing, I think you find these things very quickly. For instance, we teach a lot of sacred or ceremonial field harvests, basically hunts. We lead a lot of people on hunts. It's a very easy way to talk about it. And there's this moment when the animal, is shot or knifed or killed or however it's done, with a bow, with a gun, with a whatever. There's a certain moment where the death is happening, and we can all put words to this. And I've had people dance, I've had people scream, I've had people wail, I've had people literally just a sob. A dear friend of mine She's a Seminole in the north of Florida, and she came to a harvest recently, and in the middle of the harvest, in the dying process, and the animal's on the ground, but life has not left yet. She just turned. She faced south, maybe southeast, and she just started singing in her language, and it was beautiful, right? And so, like, the death process makes the human visit something that we don't often find ourselves visiting. I don't know if you ever played sports, but like think about like the most adrenaline rich
Mm-hmm.
moment in a sport, and then like think about where your mind was, or really your heart was, or like your groin, even like your stomach was in that moment. That's kind of the moment that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I was a wrestler in high school, a national champion, and started to do MMA and UFC in the beginning, and then that's when everything happened and life took
Mm-hmm.
a different turn. But like that like fighting, whatever, like that spirit is really there during the death process, and it impacts people totally different in different ways. For her, it was singing. I've had people dance, like I said. It's always different. And then there's a moment where the death process terminates, and it's important to say that the animal doesn't die then, because it's been dying. It's kind of dead at this point. Like scientifically, the animal has been dead for minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Scientifically, its blood, its pulse, however you want to see that, has stopped. But there's a moment where the body settles, and in all of our sacred ceremonies, that include this, every time it's impactful. But the body settles, like the chest kind of raises and then holds, and then all of a sudden, just really slightly, you see the chest go down, almost like the spirit is leaving. Maybe the spirit is leaving,
Mm-hmm.
but it is almost as if something physical is leaving. And right then and there is the rebirth, because literally seconds, milliseconds, a blink later, life has returned to the animal. I'm talking like you can see worms crawling on the soil surface. There's more flies. There's honeybees. There's certain ground wasps that are flowing. The vultures start to circle. I mean, it's only after that point that life is vying to be reborn.
Mm-hmm.
That blood that takes the death to rebirth process, which is also something I've written about back in 2023 in a book called Dark Cloud Country, is chaos. There's a chaotic middle ground between death and life and death. And so, for instance, the circle of life, or the cycle of life, which we all know, right, is you're born, you grow, you live, you die, and then something else is reborn. Maybe some of us believe that you are reborn. Regardless, that's the circle of life. There's another stage in there that I write about that's chaos. And if you come to a harvest, and if you participate in the story of your food, to say it a different way,
Mm-hmm.
you'll find the chaos. It's right there. It's right between. It's like that dawn darkness, that muddied middle ground between the animals dying and the animals reliving, right? And in our sacred harvest classes or courses or experiences, whatever you want to call them, that we perform and host, it's always that moment that hits people the hardest, because it comes into our consciousness that this animal's passing will be reborn in part through us and in
Mm-hmm.
part through the land. So like when the vultures come, right? When the beetles come, when the maggots come, and then the whole body starts to wiggle, right? The things that we leave in the field as offerings or gifts, like the maggots just swell all over it. We take it and we are reborn with that food. Literally, scientifically, our muscles become its muscles. Like when we eat, it literally becomes us, but it also becomes the land. And you have to fight through that. It's hard. It's really hard. I've had somebody who's done 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, was a helicopter machine gunist, if
Mm-hmm.
that's a word, right? And she looked at me and she says, Daniel, I've had helicopters get shot down. Like I was in a helicopter, got shot down in enemy territory. I'm shooting the gun. People are dead. I've had 3 tours in Afghanistan or Iraq. I can't remember which. And she said, but this is more intense.
Mm-hmm.
This is so much more intense than I've ever been able to participate with. Not to compare these things or to put one over the other, but the point is, when the human spirit participates in the transformation of life through death for rebirth, that chaotic, muddied middle ground, which I just call the ceremony of blood, something happens, right? And something happens because while I can give you a war story, we all don't fight in wars,
Mm-hmm.
but we all go to dinner. We all have breakfast. We all have lunch. We all eat our snacks. We eat and breathe and drink every day. And so to realize that that which fills the endless dailiness, the humdrummery of our days, is actually this, right? This intense ceremony of blood is overwhelming because it's so personal. And it's so particular and it's so common, and yet it feels the opposite. It feels unique. It feels uncommon, and it feels like it should be so distant, right? So like our modern food system, which doesn't change if it's a regenerative cow going into it or a degenerative CAFO fed cow, it doesn't matter. Our modern food system, is you take the animals out of the herd, you put them in a trailer, you cart them 3-4 hours north to a USDA inspected facility that's completely bleach cleaned and fiberglass reinforced plastic and caulk built on the inside, so you can just spray bleach everywhere. And you put the animals in these concrete stalls, and they have to be there for 12 hours, whatever the law is in the different states. Every state is different, so that they poo and wee in the stall and not in the process floor. So you have to empty which means that they're also not eating or drinking. And I mean, I've taken cows in, I've taken goats in to these facilities, and they die like in the holding stall because they're not in the field. They're not with the family, the stress of the travel, being alone in a concrete stall, not being fed or watered. Like, this is not a positive environment. And then we take the product of that, and that which is easily humanly consumable, we package in plastic, we freeze, and we offload, right? This is the beef you buy at the store, the beef you buy from the local farm. I get it. That's what that is. But then what we do is we take these massive slurping trucks at the end of the day, right? With these massive hoses that could suck up a human. And we stick these hoses into these massive gut vacs, your vats, right? And we vacuum them up and we dispose of it as biohazardous waste because it's toxic. Because it's nasty, because it's dirty. It's that which humans don't really know what to do with when we teach field harvests. And so the point is separation, dismembering, like I said earlier. When we teach field harvests, people are stunned. I mean, I've had USDA inspectors. So these are people who inspect meat processing plants all over the country, employed full-time for the United States Department of Agriculture, come to our courses to learn, right? So sometimes the people who come to these courses are not people like I am. But they come to our courses and we learn, and I have many friends that are USDA inspectors. And anyways, they came out last year to a course, to a sacred harvest. And you get about 200 pounds of awful junk, if you will, at the end of a harvest where, it's not the liver, it's not the spleen, it's not the lungs, it's not the heart, it's not the kidney, it's not the gallbladder that some people keep, it's not the hooves, which we can turn into collagen-rich jello or broth, right? So, and it's not the meat, and it's not the bones, and it's not the head. Like, it's waste to some degree. It's about 200 pounds of waste stomach. And we leave it out in the field. And I always ask people, how long would it take for this to disappear? It's always the question. How long would it take for you, if you were walking in this field, to even know that this was here? 200 pounds of stinking shit is basically what I'm asking, right? And everybody gives me different, like 3 days, 4 days. Oh, this is toxic. It's going to pollute the downstream, whatever. And I say, and it's always the morning time when we do this, maybe 10 a.m. And I say, we're going to have lunch, and then we're going to come back in about 3 or 4 hours. And when we come back, I guarantee you can't find it. And they're all like, oh, no, that's a total lie. And then you come back, and they can't find it. There's not a lick of it, sitting there. Don't get me wrong. There's a little bit of moistness in the ground, right? The maggots, the beetles, the dung beetles, the worms. We've had coyotes, black bears, mountain lions, bobcats, bald eagles that come in and kind of flirt with the idea of eating it. And then you have the hawks and the carrion crows and the scald crows and the raven. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And the vultures, can't leave those out. And it's just unbelievably massive, the amount of life that comes in to consume that which humans can't consume. It's not a green truck slurping shit, right? But it's life returning. And so to some degree, that story that I'm telling, like, that held in this way makes food sacred. It makes it living. It makes it possible to cause living. A book I wrote 2 years ago, the one I was talking about earlier, Stagtine, there's a whole section in it dealing with what I call interspecial linkages. And so we all know, or at least some of us know, and all of us believe, that memory can be passed, but also the conditions of life can be passed from one generation to the next. So for instance, if your mom, if she experienced, before she even was pregnant with you, if your mom experienced some traumatic event and developed PTSD-like symptoms from that event, or maybe PTSD itself, from that event, her mtDNA carries those effects. And so when she becomes pregnant with you, she has you will inherit the trauma's effects, but not the trauma. So you have no memory of the trauma, but you have the PTSD effects. So you'll be walking down the road, you'll experience that same trauma, not knowing that it's genetic. You'll have a PTSD-like episode right there on the side of the road, and you'll never know why. Right? So that's this burgeoning science of the idea of intraspecial linkages, or, genetic trauma passage, or whatever the term you want to use for it. And I was curious a couple of years ago, and so I started writing the book on it and learning and and such. If it's possible for that to occur interspecies, so like between you and a cow, between you and a white-tailed deer, whatever it is. And it's actually true, to cut out all the details. There's a lot of information that leads to the fact that, yeah, the memory of your food matters. It becomes your memory. The diabetic state of your food matters. It becomes your diabetic state. If it's, early stage ketoacidosis on the brink of heart attack, cardiovascular disease, you can inherit that, right? So a lot of the things that humanity is feeling is because our food is feeling that same thing. And so understanding the story of your food, participating in that story, right, is something, in my opinion, central to the human experience of a good life, of a medicine life, of a healthy life. It's why I've come to critique, like we've farmed full time for 15 years. I used to travel all around the world internationally teaching regenerative agriculture and everything else. Wrote many books about regenerative agriculture in general. And the one thing I can never get over that really, in the last maybe 5 years, pushed us in a particular direction was, in regenerative agriculture, the idea is that by simply not feeding cows grain and grass, replacing that grain with grass, that product is infinitely better. Or that by simply focusing on soil health, that everything else is more healthy. Right? Or by simply having more biodiversity in a pasture, that's a good thing, as if the pasture wants the biodiversity. All of these things, it prohibits the relationship between the farmer and the land and the farmer, the beef and, or the cows and the grass and the whatever, the nematodes pooping out soil of, plant available calcium, in the rhizosphere, like all of these things. It prohibits all of these things having relationship based upon what I would generally and openly call animism. That is to say, like when a plant photosynthesizes, it takes, the 3 ingredients, sunshine, air, and water, to create a glucose molecule, a carbon packet. It takes that carbon packet, and it doesn't actually need the carbon packet. It trades the carbon packet or glucose molecule with fungi, hopefully mycorrhizal fungi or saprophytic. It's a little bit different in different cases. But then that saprophytic fungi runs around, bacteria and other things in like that soil, aqueous soil organic matter solution that we call stable soil organic matter, or healthy soil, or compost, depending on your language and your depth in that science. But, that solution there, it swims around, and as it's swimming around, predatory nematodes, let's say, come out of nowhere and just eat the fungi, carrying the glucose molecule. They digest it, and then those nematodes poop out, let's say, plant available calcium or whatever, potassium, zinc. It just poops out some plant available nutrient. And then the plants, also with roots in the rhizosphere, eat up that nutrient, calcium, zinc, phosphorus, whatever it was, potassium. And so that's how plants eat, right? Plants don't produce their own food. They produce somebody else's food, trade that for something else. And then there's also the predatory nematode that eats it. And so plants eating also has to deal with nematode predation. But all of these things are autonomous. That is to say that they're self-decided, self-acting, animate and living systems, where there's a nematode in the soil watching fungi go past, and it's deciding to eat that one and not that one, right? And so it's a living decision. It has autonomous abilities. It has the ability in its own way to self-direct its own actions, which also means it has an understanding of its own self. It says, I'm a nematode and you're not, because it doesn't eat other nematodes. And so just like humans, it also has self-understanding. And now we're in a whole new philosophical space, but nothing about regenerative agriculture deals with that. Right? Nothing in regenerative agriculture sits down in the soil and starts to talk to predatory nematodes, asking why. Like, why didn't you eat that fungi? Why is the soil not healthy when all I'm doing is, applying all of the compost teas and the this and the worm castings and the blah and the blahs, and I'm spreading out all these, cover crop, species, and I have a whole field of, perennial warm season grasses. And I'm doing all of the things that the books and the conferences and the podcasts about regenerative agriculture are saying to do, but it's not working. Right. And then as somebody like me, you sit down and you're like, hey, your predatory nematodes are angry. That's literally your problem. Right. Your vaca papa is wrong. Right. Somebody misunderstood your vaca papa. Somebody abused it, and we're reeling from that trauma. Like, we need trauma work, not no-till drills or something like this. And so it's very different. A lot of people don't really care to listen, but they also have lands that struggle. And so the point is, as you get more into the concentric rewilding space, or really just the concentric space, what you start to realize is how an animal dies, the ceremony of its death, the love of its death, the sacredness of its death, the holiness of its death, the place of its death. Like, is it dying with its family in the field, right, in a way that is ancient and evolutionarily successful for that species?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it in a metal cage, in a guillotine, in a knockbox full of all these large sounds? Because we know, if you study the post-installation of cortisol in the meat in a USDA facility, that there's dire ramifications. I mean, we're talking so much cortisol being poured into that meat at the last moment,
Mm-hmm.
long before it can dissipate. That's just flowing into humanity. So if you're stressed and you're eating conventional meat, even if it's regenerative meat, it's just conventionally processed, maybe start thinking about that. It all matters, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just the soil that matters. It's the species inside of the soil's feelings that matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their ability to make their own decisions that matter. It's not just, is your compost tea balanced or healthy or exotic, right? Like, how hard did you get your compost tea in your foliar applicator? No, it's actually having a relationship with your foliar applicator, right? And the compost tea and all the microorganisms in there, and understanding how do we co-create a much more beautiful world together, but not necessarily forcing it.
Mm-hmm.
A writer, Patty Clarick, she wrote a book called Becoming Kin. She's an Anishinaabe writer. And she writes that, according to her people's understanding, climate change is the mother, that is Mother Earth, this planet, retreating away in grief. And I love that story, if you will, about the mother retreating away in grief, because another one of my friends, an Oglala pipe carrier, Lakota man, he talks about how until we love mother as our mother, not like our mother, we're never going to succeed. Regenerative agriculture, to some degree, is loving earth like we love our mother.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm asking in this concentric view, what a lot of my colleagues and friends and mentors have asked me in this concentric view, is what happens in the agricultural space when we love the mother as the mother, not like, not as though, but literally as. What changes? Another friend I mentioned earlier, Taylor Keene, the Omaha brother of mine, he talks about how their teachings, they say they have the plant kingdom, and then below the plant kingdom is the animal kingdom, and then below the animal kingdom is the human kingdom. And what white people or Western civilization or the Judeo-Christian worldview, or however you want to see it, has done is put the white people up top. They
Mm-hmm.
steward the rest. And what he says is, no, the plants and animals steward us. And so what if agriculture, so that's the Omaha and many other Plains tribes teachings and wisdom that they hold. But the question is, what happens when humanity becomes that which is stewarded and not the steward?
Mm-hmm.
Can we still produce food? Obviously, yes. Can it be even healthier food? Obviously, yes. Can it feed the world kind of food? It's debatable, but probably also obviously yes. About 23% of all foods produced globe-wide spoil in the distribution system. And if we only solve 25% of that, 23% or whatever it is, we would be able to feed like 3 billion or 2.3 billion or something like that more people than we feed today. And so my point is, I mean, we can cut, global corn production by 25%, or feed,
Mm-hmm.
human feed corn production by 25%, and still feed 2 or 3 billion more people than we do if we just fix the globalization problem, which is, by the way, a localization problem. But that's kind of dawdling in another conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But there's stories there. That's what I'm trying to get at. That the story of your food matters. Not that it was raised in a regenerative farm, but that it had the ability as an autonomous actor, a protagonist in its own
Mm-hmm.
story. Like, that's what matters. And how can we as humans, especially in the modern sense, living such modern lives that have so much demands on us, right? Like, I don't know, a gallon of milk at the store is like $9 or whatever, $10 or more maybe. Like, how can we, with these very real external economic and social pressures, still look to animals and say, steward us?
Mm-hmm.
There's a story there, and we have to walk that story as a character in that story to truly participate with it.
Mm-hmm. You said a lot of incredibly fascinating things. I do a lot of it does come back to this. It's weird when you were talking about the nematodes and the soil and that whole cycle you got into there. There's this inborn reciprocity in nature, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not always pretty, but I find that fascinating. First of all, and also just this. There's a humility there too, where you were saying like if we can be like, how can nature be our steward and the animals be our steward. And I find that humbling. And I wanted to go back a little bit too, to like this, putting these animals into these slaughterhouses or where they're at, and kind of reminds me of even putting humans into hospitals and school systems. And we kind of have sanitized our culture from like the real like rawness, and like women, birthing children in these very sanitary spaces with blue lit environments, and just that disconnect from nature, which, we're kind of circling back to that story. And I just find it, I really appreciate the way you laid it out, and I find it fascinating, and it makes so much intuitive sense to me, even though I still don't really have the language for it. But I'm going to listen back to this and see if I can dissect even a little bit more. But I do feel like there's this, I want to develop the language for some of the things that we discussed, but I also think that it ties into human health as well with, lost for words, with this idea of trying to like separate relationships from our own health. And a lot of people are like, well, I eat the healthy-ish, healthy quote unquote food, or I do all of the things, but they're not thinking about their relationship to their self or their consciousness or their families, and they're disconnected from that. So it was the same thing you were talking about, like with people's soil. Well, it's like, I'm doing this for my soil. Why isn't my land healthy? But they don't have that relationship. So I do find that, again, that it translates into humanity. Like, we're missing other things. We're missing story. We're missing a deeper spiritual connection, a connection to the land. We're missing connection to our ancestors. And again, I've met a lot of people who are like, well, I go to the gym, or I go to, I eat all the foods that I'm told to eat, and they're still not expressing what I would say is a healthy thing, because there's not emotion tied into it. So we have this sort of disconnect in our culture, and so I do appreciate.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's like this inevitability of outcome that you're getting to that is just assumed in our culture, especially in like the health and body optimization side of our culture. Or even like 15, 16, 17 years ago when I started in my health journey, I lived in hospitals all over the country for years. And I got really, as you can imagine, I was really depressed, in the truest sense. Because I think I truly, up to that point, bought the narrative that health was mine. And I'm not saying that Creator doesn't want you to be healthy, but what I'm saying is maybe not yet. And so when the agriculturalist looks at the land, right, and we see a naked land, or we see a biodiverseless land, or we see, exposed soil, or we see unhealthy cows because they're eating on unhealthy forages grown in substrates that are themselves unhealthy. Like, we want to fix it. White Western civilization is really good at seeing a problem and wanting to fix it. Right? Patriarchal societies are very good at seeing a problem and wanting to fix it. Right? Ask any husband and wife relationship. It's almost a joke in comedies today and in sitcoms, and it's that prevalent. And one thing I think that is very important, and this, I think men have a very difficult time with empathy. We have very few empathetic mentors, I think, today. I think in eras past, maybe it wasn't the case. Maybe in cultures past, it wasn't the case. But I don't know many empathetic men today. And I think story is a very fine way for men to experience empathy, and therefore maybe even through osmosis grab some of that empathy. But also, like, and not to only talk about Shakespeare, because there's a lot of different examples, but everybody knows of Shakespeare, regardless if you read it or not. But like, in a Shakespearean tragedy, shit hits the fan, and it's not okay. Like at the end of Hamlet, one of my favorite plays, like, everybody just dies. Like, everybody's living. And then the last, like, page of the play, like, the king dies and Hamlet dies and the queen, I I can't remember her name, she dies, and Claudius dies, and everybody's just dying on the stage, or like in King Lear, everybody's just dying on the stage. And that's the end of the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no inevitability of a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine, another Lakota, his name is Wankapitopa, he was in conversation with me, and I was writing my book 2 years ago, Stagtine. And I was really at the time very frustrated with my own thoughts. For months, I was sitting there writing, and I couldn't come to a conclusion that I liked, not to the book, just to some of the thoughts that I was dealing with in the book. And because it's very hard. When I said that, when I asked what would it look like if humans were stewarded by the land and its animals, the plant nation and the animal nation, to some degree, that question is very easy to ask. It's hard to apply, because in order for you to apply it, you have to release control. And you release control, you release the idea of an outcome. And I was
Mm-hmm.
fighting my way through that, because to some degree, I have 3 very young children. I have a wife. I have a family. I feed a community. We have 109 people that live out here in this little city of ours. And many people, rely on the products of this land. I think farmers should be producing food for people to consume, like absolutely. And so people rely on you, and there's a lot of pressure, and there's also ecological pressure. We live in very turbulent times, regardless if it's man-made or not. I think it's both. I think Patty Clarick, the Anishinaabe writer of Becoming Kin, is true. I think the mother is also retreating away in grief.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of man-made and kind of not. I think there's a lot of problems, economic problems, social problems. For instance, economic problems that farmers are dealing with right now is 3 years ago, to buy a bag of minerals for your animals, just organic rock minerals, because the soil is depleted, so you have to give it to them so they're not dying in the field. I mean, it's just standard good animal husbandry. All regenerative farmers do it. A bag of minerals costs $20. Today it costs $75, right? But I can't charge more for that. Like at the
Mm-hmm.
same price I was charging for regenerative, grass-fed and finished, ground beef at the local farmers market is still the price I'm charging today, 3 years later. You start to charge a little bit more, and you lose half your customers. I mean, people can only pay what they can pay, and people maybe don't want to pay what they should pay. There's a lot of complexity there. But the point is, there's social problems, there are ecological problems, there's climate change problems, there's whatever. And to say that I'm going to lose control
Mm-hmm.
is to very much also potentially say I'm going to lose, as
Mm-hmm.
my culture, as the economic and political and social system so defines that word, lose and win. I don't think anybody actually loses and wins, but I think our culture sees it as such. And so losing control is something very petrifying to people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so as we're moving through that, releasing control, being exposed to variables that we could have controlled our way out of very simply just by enforcing more of a dictatorial or mastery over the animals and their locations or their husbandry or their breeding or something like this. We could have asserted control and navigated our way around these obstacles, but now the obstacles are real, like really in your face, because we didn't. We're co-creating this together, me, the obstacles, and the animals, and we're all learning from each other, and we're all kind of stewarding each other in that way. That system, he said, my friend Wankapitopa, the Lakota man, he said, that system is placing your hope in the life that Creator gave you to live, not placing your hope in a life that achieves the outcomes that you thought you needed to achieve. Hope is not placed in the achievement of outcomes, but the living of a life that Creator put you here to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that change is everything. I think it's absolutely everything. I think to some degree, very small degree, it's what Hamlet is saying. Not Hamlet, Shakespeare is saying in some of his tragedies, that maybe just being the right person in the play is what the play needs. Maybe not a happy outcome or a loving romance, but a tragedy is what the play needs to illustrate the point. A lot of Plains tribes, the Dakota and Lakota, the Oseti Sakawi, the Sioux, they're most dominant in this way, in this story, but they have the prophecy of the 7th generation, the white buffalo calf. Where hundreds of years ago, they prophesied that 7 generations from now, 4 white buffalo calf will be born. And on the 4th one being born, the 7th generation will be born of humans, the 7th generation from then. And that generation will be the generation that rises up and turns back to indigenous ways. Traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous wisdoms, indigenous food ways, cultural ways, languages, etc. And the 4th buffalo calf, I think, was born in 2014. And I know a lot of my mentors and brothers and friends who are of those nations and of those peoples. They claimed that the people, the human beings born 2019 and beyond, are really that generation to turn back. But the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing is, even 10 years ago, the conversation you and I are having, it's almost unheard of, right?
Very
And so
true.
there really is a shift that is happening, a shift towards the correct ordering of the earth, not with humans up top, but with humans, with everybody else as mammals, right?
Mm.
In my book, I talk about earthlings, humanity being just an earthling.
Mm.
Our local people, the Monacan people, the Siouan speaking people, been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Recent in 1997, there was an archaeological survey done just about a quarter mile from here that proved like 8,000 years of continuous habitation in this region. Not that
Mm.
we needed the science, but the science was interesting regardless. And their name, the Monacan, their previous chief, he defined as earth people or earthlings. Like that's what they are. They're earth people, they're earthlings. I think if we were to rephrase our own mythology in that way, like if our mythology would be reawakened, that the stories we tell ourselves, maybe not the stories that our culture used to, but like the stories you tell ourselves every day, like when you're at the gym, when you're waking up, when you're drinking your coffee, when you're at work, when you're going for the run, when you're trying to buy better foods, like earth peoples. Like what
Mm.
would an earthling want earth to provide it for, to provide
Mm.
it with? How would that earthling respond if that thing that you were eating actually killed something else? Or, all of the, like that simple rephrasing, I think is key. Another
Mm.
thing I tell people is go for a walk, and go for a walk for an undetermined time. And at the end of your walk, whenever that is done, and anybody who's gone for a walk knows that, like if you're going to walk with a girlfriend or your wife or your friend from college you haven't seen for a while, you just walk.
Mm.
You don't really have a destination in mind, but at a certain point you both realize that you should turn around. Like that's the end of the walk. Go for a walk like that and just do what you normally do. Take the people you normally take, listen to the audiobook you normally listen to, whatever it is, the music, whatever. But at the end of the walk, I want you to like consciously tune your brain into all of the life that you walked past but never acknowledged.
Mm.
And then deal with the sheer magnificence of the amount of life that you just walked past and never noticed, and deal with
Mm.
that, right? And come to grips with the fact that you didn't even notice the house wren, on that rose bush, and the color of the roses, and like how many roses were there, and how tall was it, and like you didn't even notice like the green snake in that bush over there. Like you didn't see anything. Like you
Mm.
participated in life, and yet you weren't a participant,
Mm.
right? And don't be down about that. Like don't believe that there's an inevitability of an outcome that's going to now jump into the fore and save your life, but start to deal with that and start to really question what in your life was in the way that you didn't see all of the kin around you, and you didn't acknowledge it, or you didn't even look at another human being and do that inner work, or maybe find friends to help you do that inner work,
Mm.
and start there. Because I think a lot of people, not that you're asking me to do that, to help people start somewhere, but like I think a lot of people listen to my words and I think they get overwhelmed. Like I'm just trying
Mm.
to buy better food. Now you're telling me I have to go drink the blood in the field. And I get that, I
Mm.
completely get that. And so I think you have to begin selfishly, right?
Mm.
Go for your walk, do that. Don't change your purchasing decisions. God, please don't vote with your dollar. Just go out and meet yourself, and see why you weren't willing to meet the other selves all around you, or why you didn't see the rose bushes living, or that horribly invasive Japanese maple that only landscapers plant. Like, why
Mm.
didn't you see it? And it's glorious, like maroon, like plum, like foliage. Like, why didn't you stop and stare at it? Like,
Mm.
why didn't you want to take out your phone and take a picture?
Mm.
And if you did take out your phone to take a picture, maybe we did need to talk about that too. But like, why didn't you even want to?
Mm.
Never let that image pass, and
Mm.
and start there and work through that. And I don't know. I think that's a fine place to start.
Mm. Well, I think that, I think that's great advice. And even just the concept of some people don't even take that time to take that walk in nature. So,
That's true.
just,
Maybe you just start taking walks.
well, and just doing that, but then just to approach some of these ideas and questions, even because it can be, I think a lot of people do get overwhelmed by just life itself. But if you can translate that overwhelm into awe, which is in some ways what you're doing, that's a simpler way to put it, but you're becoming awe inspired by the sheer magnificence and at the same time overwhelming nature of life itself and
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
And but it's amazing. And that reconnection to nature, I do, to what you said about us having this conversation, I do think that the world is shifting and consciousness is shifting in a lot of ways. We still have, there's so much sickness and like twistedness still happening, and probably as part of this natural process that we're going to have to go through. If there is awakening, it's going to contain a lot of darkness and sickness, and God willing, we see through to it in some sort of rebirth. And even it makes me think of, I might be bouncing a little bit here, but it makes me think of the Terence McKenna quote about chaos is what we've lost touch with, because, essentially, I don't remember the rest of the quote, but essentially us being that more of a dominator culture that wants to control and kind of rape nature for profit. There's something overwhelming about something chaotic and something feminine. So we want to control it. And I do think that empathy in men can be more rare, but empathetic masculinity is also a really helpful and powerful thing to awaken for people to kind of have that sort of protection and servitude with the caring and the empathy. So I would like to see that inspired more in our culture. And it leads into one question for you, exploring consciousness. Do you think that the sort of work you do and being a storyteller and having some of that nature, do you think that that's a major way you explore consciousness, or do you use tools like meditation or plants, or is there other ways that you've inspired this awe and this curiosity and this deep reverence and this deep reverence for life, I guess?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. An amazing question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the idea, I think there's a lot of pressure for people to listen to conversations like this and then think that like ayahuasca or the frog juice thing, or I can never remember that name, but like I think there's that pressure there. Like our mutual connection here, Kyle Kingsbury. The first time I ever met him, he came out to an experience here with his whole team, and he looked at me at the end of it, and he's like, Daniel, you are the most, like, you're either always on mushrooms or you figured out something else, and there is alternatives, right? Like, I think even the people who study plant medicine, there are cultures who had the plant medicine and rarely used it. And there's cultures that had the plant medicine and all the time used it, or just the shamans used it, or the elders used it, or whatever it might have been. The creator's language for connection and reciprocity, this kinship, I think is written in all of us, and it just wants to be expressed. I think that's very true. I think some of us need the plants to enliven that language into a syllabary that we can understand very easily. I know people who live very modern lives. They do an ayahuasca trip and their lives change, right? So the syllabary was there. It just they didn't understand the language. It's like, some English-speaking individual looking at, let's say, Aramaic or something. Just the syllabary is truly different. You can't just pick it up like an American English-speaking individual can pick up French and start to pick out words, because the syllabary, the alphabet is the same. The alphabet is different, right? And so like plant medicine can wake us up to the new alphabet. I think that's really true. I know plenty of people who do these things. I don't really find myself doing much of them. My like overwhelm is already awe to the point that it's also overwhelming. I have a good friend that I've brought up a couple times here, Shalay Tazani, the Mokopona, the grandmother of the Waitaha people in New Zealand. And she always jokes. She calls herself the big auntie. Like, she's this massive character, always just like bursting in like energy and love. And she says, if you walk into the forest and you don't hear anybody talking, you're not listening. Right. And so I think asking ourselves the question, what do we need to do to hear the people talking? And if this question doesn't make sense to you because of the way I've phrased it, and they're not people talking, they're trees talking, then maybe we need to start a little bit earlier and start to unpack, what does it mean for a tree to be a person, right? Not as a Homo sapien, not as a bipedal, human as we understand it today, but a person, right? A life with its own self-determining, self-understanding, self-directing, autonomous, animate power, right? And I mean, even scientifically, we know that trees are people that communicate,
Hmm.
right? The tree peoples, I mean, Suzanne Simard, for instance, wrote a whole book on this. Not that the science is all hers, but she wrote a whole book exploring the science where if you take two trees and you cover one with complete shade cloth, 100%, zero photosynthetic action can come from this tree. You will, and then you measure the soil between it. You'll see that this other tree with full photosynthetic activity, no shade cloth, is overproducing photosynthesis,
Hmm.
glucose molecules, and then through what she calls the wood wide web. So like the root systems, they're actually I was going to say transferring, but they're literally gifting. Let's
Hmm.
use that language. They're literally gifting the products of photosynthesis to the trees that can photosynthesize.
Hmm.
And so that they're feeding each other, right? And so when there's a source and there's a sink, the source flows to the sink. And then the craziest thing is if you take the shade cloth off the one, and it's still alive, it shouldn't be alive. All science up until this point tells us that trees can't survive without photosynthesis. We just forgot that trees live in community, and so they can survive without photosynthesis as long as they have friends. And then we cover the other one, the one that was the source, right? And then all of a sudden, and this is where it's autonomous. It's truly self-understood. The flow switches. It's not that a source tree always flows to a particular sink tree, but the sink tree can become the source tree, and the source tree can become the sink tree. And just like this relationship where maybe you need help and I help you, well, a year later when I need help, you help me. This is life. This is human community. This is reciprocity and love and kinship in the truest sense. And species, all species across the globe have this. Science is slowly, waking up to the fact. Mythology has long understood this fact. The indigenous storytelling of today, all the way through, our ancestral storytelling that we're just reawakening in our own bodies and souls through this dream walking and studying and meeting these stories where they are. It's all coming back to understand that when you walk into the forest, as Shaleta says, and you don't hear people talking, you're not listening. And so, again, asking the question, if we can get to that space, why aren't we listening? Maybe it's because we don't know how to listen, so maybe we do some plans. Maybe it's because we're too busy to listen. Plants aren't going to solve that.
Hmm.
Foraging, I think, is a really healthy thing to start to do. The Maori, they have this phrase that all of what you need is harvestable within the thrown net of your home. So wherever you are, you can throw a net. They're seafaring, fishing people, an island people. But however far you can throw your net, there is the medicine. So when you're sick, there's the medicine. When you're hungry, there's the medicine. When you're lonely, there's the medicine. I think humans have destroyed the world to make that proverb maybe less true than it should be. But to some degree, the question is, if you had to throw a net for medicine, throw a net for food, how much time, and that was it, and you depended upon that. You were a student of your survival in that way. How much time would you spend every day preparing the net? How much time would you spend every day making sure that when the net landed, there was something there? Like, how much time would you spend dedicated to surviving today? Not, you know, working 100 hours a week or doing all of these other things or having, golfing hobbies on the weekend, or I'm picking on golf. I hate golf. But like, like you would spend your life in a different way.
For sure.
Foraging forces you to do that, because when you're hungry, you better have already foraged or have it close by.
Hmm.
Right. And so if you're hungry and yet you're going to golf with your buddies, like you can't forage at the pesticide ridden golf course. Like that's not going to happen. And so foraging forces you to live a very particular life where constantly you are in view of the animacy and kinship of the world. It's forced into your view. Not all of us have the ability, obviously, to do this, I understand. But find that substance, that daily practice that forces you to come into face-to-face contact with creator, with kin, with our, cousins, with the plant nations and the tree peoples and everything else. Like, force yourself to find that connection. Plants are fine. I smoke plants. And this little, this is
It's
pretty cool.
awesome.
This is sumac. Staghorn sumac is basically a tobacco replacement. It's a shrub that grows here, a native shrub. The indigenous peoples of this region smoked it before tobacco. It's really wonderful.
Awesome. What's
Really
the
wonderful. And it grounds you to place. It's ceremonial for me. I don't just like do it for fun for 15 minutes on my break, but like, it's like a practice. It's sacred practice for me. It grounds us to that place. It also forces me to love a plant that farmers spray. More farmers spray staghorn. I think staghorn sumac is one of the top, maybe the top 10 herbicided plants in the state of Virginia agriculturally. And so it forces me to love a plant that everybody else wants to kill.
Mm.
And so it forces me to see it again and see it. And every time I see it growing in my fields, right, as this shrub that's just taking over, I see it and I say, thank you. not fuck you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a totally different vocabulary. And that's a fine practice. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe you find ways that it becomes holy and sacrosanct to your own life in your own way. I know a lot of people that grow medicinal mushrooms or microdosable mushrooms, in their basements or whatever, and they take it themselves, which is legal. You can grow it if you consume it in some states. Um, and that's a fine practice for them. I would never like go online and buy psilocybin, and get it shipped to me in a plastic box and be like, oh, cool, here's the medicine.
Mm-hmm.
In the same sense that I would never, want meat and go to the grocery store knowing that it's cut at 10 to 20% full of ammonia, but they call it grass-fed beef and it's not even, anyways, not even from the United States. And you just got to, create the practice that forces you to meet yourself and meet the creator and meet your kin. I think that's the most important part.
You said one. There was one thing you said in there that I thought was interesting and made a lot of sense to me. That if you were too busy, the plant's not going to help you necessarily. Because and I know that you said a lot there that was fascinating, but I wanted to harp on that because we are such a busy culture, let's say, and people like if you ask someone sometimes how they're doing, like, oh, I'm really busy, and I'm guilty of it too. I don't find there to be a problem directly with being busy, but if you're just busy and you're celebrating the fact that you're busy, it doesn't really mean that much.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people who want to explore their mind and their conscience, and they just are in that momentum of doing whatever that they are doing, and then they take 2 days or a week to, take a high dose of something or take mushrooms or go to Peru or Costa Rica and do ayahuasca, and then they return to that life that they're living. And I think that it's helped some people, but there's a lot of people who they just get back into the routine and then they think they have to revisit the plant.
Right.
And that also can probably be exploitative and harmful. And that's why there's more problems, it seems like now, with people using ayahuasca, like places popping up in Costa Rica and in Peru with non-integral people serving it. And then also even in the States, like people in New York or Texas. Like, I don't know that that's the environment that you should be drinking jungle medicine in.
Yeah.
And I'm open to being incorrect on that, but I haven't seen it be as integral.
Yeah. There's a certain power, I think, to my dear friend and sister's proverb, or people's proverb, about throwing the net.
I love that.
Right outside of our house, there's are you familiar with datura? It's a plant medicine. Many peoples here in the Western Hemisphere use it as plant medicine. It's the first mother, some people call it. It celebrates like the sacred feminine. It's a very, very chaotic, feminine, sacred mother, first mother, maybe moon trip, if you will. It grows in many sacred places for many peoples. And it popped up right in front of our house the other day. And I sent it to my friend, a picture. And he's a Omaha fella, Cherokee and Omaha fella. And he's like, oh, there it is. Not that we're going to do anything with it. It's very poisonous. It requires some knowledge that I don't have, and I don't care to have right now either. But the point is, it's like, I think many of us, this is hard. I get it. This is very hard. Easy to say, hard to do. But I think many of us see health as something we can go grab, and we go so far to grab it. And the datura is growing right in front of our porch, or the children are growing right behind our porch, like right there with us, right in the house, in the heart of the home, in the womb. And we miss it. And we're so busy. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's hard. There's nothing easy. There's a lot of harder conversations we could be having to really, put scaffolding around this conversation. Like how hard people have to work in order to make a dime today. Things
For
like
sure.
this. The bag of minerals that the farmers have to buy being 3 or 4 times more expensive, but I can't sell my meat for anymore. These kind of things. In the state of Virginia in like 2022 or 2021, I can't remember, the average take home for a full-time farmer was $18,000 a year. Like that was their full-time salary, working at least 60 hours a week, at least. And that, by the way, that has not improved in the slightest. So like, I get the fact that, life is very difficult, but I think at the same time, what mother is asking us to do is to meet that difficulty, and to see what we can do to slowly change it, right? This inevitability of an outcome, if we can just revisit that for one last moment, the inevitability, the worldview, the framework that is omnipresent in our culture that prostrates the inevitability of an outcome at the feet of success, I think also quite well inhabits this part of the conversation where we see a problem and we need to fix it, right? We see a problem with our health. We see, man, if I can only access what this guy's talking about in this podcast, through plant medicine, it'll be so much easier, or whatever it is. I have this trauma and I can work it out by, flying to Costa Rica and doing ayahuasca or whatever it is. And maybe that could be the solution. I'm not saying it's not, but we want to fix the problems now, right? And what I always tell people is I am only beginning to ask, or really even phrase the asking of the questions in ways that my great-grandchildren will finally have the words for. And then their great-grandchildren will maybe start to have even like the slightest answers for. And over time, and over time, and over time, the answers will unfurl, right? All we can do now is start to formulate the language to ask the questions. One of the guys I brought up on this, a brother, a mentor, the Taylor Keene, Omaha friend, he says the Omaha have been in Nebraska, the Nebraska territory, for about 800 years. When we have a question about agriculture, ecology, things like this, place-based wisdom, when we have a question about these things, instead of asking that question, finding the results, or trying to, we ask the Pawnee who've been here for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And he goes, and so don't tell me all of these 6th or 7th generation ranchers who have been here for 100 years, 150 years, know the questions and know the solutions. We've been here for 800. We don't even know the questions. So there's a tenure, there's a timeline of habitation, of rootedness that a species and a culture and a language needs in place, right? Until we actually can start to formulate the ideas of an outcome. And so like, don't jump so head over heels so fast into believing that you have a problem, you can solve it today and now. Try to. I'm not saying don't try to, but what I'm saying is have peace about it. And sometimes that peace is just spending your Saturdays instead of at golf with your children, or picking up a book from the local library about edible plants in your region and working with your local, ag extension officers to see if they have any ideas on which farms you can go to that are no spray, that don't have chemicals, and you can come experiment with these plants. When I say experiment, what I mean is walk the fields and see if you can find them. And if you can find them and you're sure about what they are, start to taste them and determine the difference between when a book says that it's edible, if it's palatable, right? Because not all things that are edible are palatable at all times. Some things in the spring are both edible and palatable, but in the summer when the sun is high, they're not palatable, but they're still edible, you see, and start to play with that. Like dedicate a couple hours a week to that instead of whatever, right? Or dedicate one night a week to do cooking at home and experimenting with it and like loathing every minute of it until you don't loathe it and you love it. Like whatever it is, be okay in the uncomfortable pain of it, I think is what I'm saying. Be hungry, be bored. These are two things that modern humans can't do. We can't be bored and we can't be hungry. We're always snacking. We're always on our phones. So maybe what the difference is be hungry and be bored for a day, and go from there. Whatever. I can talk my way around this all day long. But the point is, don't push for an outcome. That's one of the main problems.
I like that. I like that point. I like the point of people not being able to be bored or to be hungry, and just to kind of lean into the discomfort a little bit, and to not. I mean, that's another. We could go in circles on this and talk for a long time, but that's another thing. Going back to like the constant maximizing, like take every supplement, do the cold plunge, do the sauna. Like you're trying to perfect yourself. Like you can't fucking do it all. And
No.
don't get me wrong. I am curious. I want to experiment with a lot of different things. I want to travel. I want to do the cold plunge. I want to do the sauna, but like you have to remove that. It's a Western, going back again to that Western mindset of like perfecting and solving and controlling everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And at the same time, my wife and I, we always joke because, as farmers, we often find ourselves in precarious climate situations. Like when the climate is really bad, like in a horrendous windstorm, like we're outside, We're not inside. The second I see a cloud forming in the sky that is looming in a way that I fear, we're outside, right? Or if it's a blizzard, we're outside. If it's negative 20 degrees, we're outside. If it's like a nice, balmy 60, 70, 75, 80, like we're inside. Like we have nothing to do. So when times get bad, we get going, as in out. And we always joke with people in the wintertime. We'll like get on the four-wheelers or get on a horse or whatever we're doing, and it's like 0 degrees and somehow it's raining because it's Appalachia. And you're just like frostbitten. And she'll look at me and she'll be like, cold plunge, yeah? And it's like, yeah, no, it's like what I'm trying to say is sometimes I feel like a lot of these body optimization practices, they're not warranted. It's just, it's so clear that you're living a modern suburban life and all you're doing is adding nature back in. Like the idea of a cold plunge is like be uncomfortable in the cold for a second, like in the real cold, and like let your body deal with that and the breathing techniques that come with that and the whatever it is. Like that's where my science of it loses. But like I can give you that 6 months out of the year, for free, and you get work done at the same time. Or like what are saunas and things. We have a sauna, so I can't speak that negatively about it. It's nice. Passive sweating is a wonderful thing when all you do is active sweat. Being the farmer in the sun. I mean, it's like 100 degrees today. It's horrible.
Oh yeah, down in the south too is it's a little bit
place.
south. Yeah, a little bit
Yeah.
south. You said
It's
Virginia,
the
right?
east side of the Appalachian Mountains. No matter where you are in the South, like in the mid-South or upper South,
Okay.
as long as you're on the east side of the Appalachians, it's freaking hot.
Okay.
If it's like 95 degrees, it's 110 real feel or heat index or whatever it's called. Not that matters, but be uncomfortable, Meet nature. Nature is uncomfortable.
So I wanna ask you, I want to give you time to answer this. So I want to ask you just one more question to kind of go off of. I mean, it's a large question, so feel free to elaborate. But what do you, what do you want to pass on, at least to the audience or to your children? What sorts of messages right now do you want to deliver to the culture and again to your family? And I want to keep that pretty open, and I hope that that's not too broad of a question. And then I also want to allow you to talk about what you're working on one more time and where people can find you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's recently our children, live with us full time. And I don't necessarily mean that in the modern way. What I mean is like when we're outside, they're outside. When we're sleeping, they're sleeping, kind of thing. We live our lives very together. And we were outside recently, about a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles from the house, working with some cows and horses and such. And our son, he's 5, got stung by like a ground hornet or yellow jacket or something right in his neck, like right in the esophagus. And he's not allergic, but it was a perfect sting, and the poison of the sting started to swell up his throat. I mean, we're 20 plus minutes from getting home, and we're about an hour and a half away from the hospital, the closest hospital, even the most shitty version of it. And so, like, not a good place, not a good place to be in this moment. And our daughter, she's 7. Her name is Elowen. We call her Winnie. She just turned 7. And immediately, without thinking, I mean, when I say immediately, what I mean is like A-B, 1, 2, blink, blink. She just falls off the four-wheeler where she was sitting. It was nestled under this tree, but she falls off the four-wheeler, and she just starts padding through the understory of all of this growth, kind of a big burgeoning scrubland, early silvopasture type arrangement. And she's just burrowing through it, almost lose her in the fray, and she's just going and throwing leaves across and just burrowing down in there like a little weevil. And she comes up, and something is in her mouth, and she's chewing it. She's masticating it, and she spits out this horrendous, slimy green gob of leaf matter, of vegetative matter that she's been masticating, opening up the fibers of, letting the spit, the amino acids, the enzymes and things the enzymes break apart its fibers and release the medicine. And she takes it and she throws it on our 5-year-old son's neck, and she holds it there. And she goes, hold this. We call him Gumpy. Gumpy's his nickname. She goes, Gumpy, hold this. So she holds it. And then she turns back around, crawls back through it, the grass that she was looking through, maybe 10 feet, 11, 12 feet, whatever it was, distance from us. And I walked closer. And when I walked closer, she didn't see me there. I mean, she was way underneath, 3-4 feet underneath the foliage. She's way underneath there. And I heard her saying, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here, thank you. And she had picked Plantago major, common plantain, which actually, after masticating it, if you put it on like a bee sting, it sucks the venom out. So not only could she find Plantago major, not only did she not pick the poisonous plants all around it, not only did she know exactly where to find it, that is to say, in a certain place in a field where the sun is right or the soil is right, like she searched for it in some sort of methodical way, but she was thankful for it. And that's to no grace to her. That's to no congratulatory thing to her. This is just her life. This is just the dailiness of it. But her going back and just saying, thank you for being here. Thank you. She understood, even at 7, not only everything I said, but more importantly, that is to say, the location, what the plant looks like, how to masticate it, how not to turn it into pulp, but to still leave the leaves and the veins intact. So like how far to masticate. She knew all of these things. But she also knew that Gumpy's life, maybe not, probably not, but to her, definitely, the weight was heavy, depended upon, as Shaleta says, the net, right? The mother's grace, this reciprocity, this kinship, this co-creative power between all of the created species of Earth, mother, as we say. And so she was thankful for it, meaning not just thank you for solving a problem, but thank you for being here so that we could solve a problem. And I think one of the main things that I like to get to people is that when a regenerative farmer talks about biodiversity, we can increase biodiversity. Regenerative farming increases biodiversity. Degenerative or commercial farming decreases biodiversity. The climate catastrophe and all of the climate chaos and problems that you hear about on the news and social media, to some degree, is a product of decreasing biodiversity. You hear that Indigenous, peoples all over the world control, or that is to say, nurture or steward 80% of the biodiversity. Like you see, these are the things you see, and all of these things are true in their own way. But when a human becomes an item of that, a member of that biodiversity, that's us stepping into the actions of the mother, stepping into the world, that is to say, as an earthling, Earth and its earthlings. That's when the biodiversity is real, in the truest sense, when your survival depends upon the mother, in the true sense, not the plastic, not the grocery store, not the distribution systems, not, Airmark food distributors at all the restaurants, where like you're trying to support local farmers and like you're trying your best and that's fine and good. But what do we have to do to cultivate that Winnie awareness, that sense that not only do we start to formulate the understanding, this loose and immature and 100 generations lacking place-based knowledge, and what we know is from what we've been giving by our mentors, brothers and sisters. Not just that part, but how do we cultivate an awareness that our lives actually depend upon it? I think story is really good there. I think experience is really good there, which is just a story. That's just lived story. I do not believe that everything you eat has to be harvested by your hands. I believe that everything you eat should at least in part be at least one acknowledged by your hands in some sense. So if you're eating a food off of a farmer's table or a farmer's market table or something, like know the farmer, shake their hand. But I think one time, if not more than one time, maybe at the ceremony of days, every couple of years, every year, you need to participate in a harvest. Like if you're eating meat and you've never saturated your entire body with the animal's blood, because that's what it looks like when you do a field harvest, there's a problem there, a real disconnect. You are taking the life of an animal and ingesting it without ever knowing what that means. And if that ingestation, that nourishment, that digestion is becoming an aspect of you and you don't know what that means, then don't be surprised when you don't know yourself. So that's how this all works together. I'm not saying everything you eat has to be harvested by your hands. But what I'm saying is find an opportunity where you can participate once, so that every time you eat, you have this story to tell yourself. Because you lived it. You lived that story. You were a character in that story. You were in the field. You were covered in blood. You got the smells. You have the feelings. And now 2, 3, 4, 20 years later, you're sitting at your table. You're eating a wonderful burger you bought from Costco. And you're thinking to yourself, I've been there. This is the story. I remember when the spirit left this animal. Maybe not this exact one, but this animal, this species, this kin of mine, right? And so that's ingrained within you. And it starts to become a practice. And as it starts to become a practice, it becomes a ceremony. And as it becomes a ceremony, it becomes sacred. And as it becomes sacred, it actually changes you in the truest sense. right? And so Winnie was born with this. She's 7 years old. Every day of her life has been this way, and so she acted accordingly. How can we, as a civilized, modern humanity, you and me included, right, become 7-year-old Winnie again? Not in the fullest sense. I'm not saying you have to live in the middle of nowhere, Appalachia, Seneca, and 400 acres, but how can we start to unfurl our modernity from ourselves? Start to unroll that, tapestry off our legs and arms, and, start to gravitate towards that story, becoming awakened to story, participating in that story, I think are all very accessible early stages to living in this post-colonial, post-control, post-patriarchal, entirely chaotic and feminine world. Right? That's the future. And hopefully, if we're to survive, that's the future. So taking those early steps, what's in our way? Like, I think that's what all of our work, all of our books, like the Plain Pillar is a Celtic tale retelling mythological fantasy that I wrote this earlier this year. It's a fiction, it's a fantasy book. That's what that's really getting at. What's in our way? This apathy, deals with apathy and colonialism, retelling in a fantasy story. The book I'm writing right now is a horror that's also in that same series. So it's still mythological fantasy, but it's to some degree playing with the horror. Horror is a wonderful genre that opens your eyes. I'm not saying horror as in like the teenagers go to a cabin in the middle of the woods and a slasher is there and he kills everybody with a chainsaw. That's not horror. That's just entertainment. Horror in the true sense, like in the Stephen Graham Jones, the Clive Barker sense, the old sense. It's a genre that says, look at this, but like, look at it. Don't hide anything. Like, let's look at the real thing in front of you. And then when you see the real thing in the front of you, you can name it. And when you name it, you can not control it, but control our response to it. I think horror is a really amazing genre when it's done right to show us what we refuse to see. And by refusing to see it, we hide it and we keep it alive. But when horror shows it to us, it has to be revealed. And when it is revealed, we can now defeat it because we can see what we're doing. And so the next book is a horror that'll come out next year sometime. All of these things, though, it's trying to remove that apathy or hurdle, which also looks like colonization of our own selves, from our observation, from that world sense. Not like world view, but world sense, how we taste the world, how we participate in the world, how we smell the world, how the world feels on us, all of these things.
Well, thank you so much, dude. You have an excellent way of communicating, and I think that's beautiful. And I think the story of your daughter's beautiful, and I'm sure you have an amazing family that's going to grow up in at least under your supervision, but in a hopefully better world. But I feel like we also talked for a while. I barely scratched the surface. So I do appreciate, again, speaking to you. You have, like I said, you have an excellent way of communicating, and I think your work is super important. And I hope that more people continue to get access to it. So I'm happy to talk to you today, and hopefully talk to you again.
Yeah,
man.
I appreciate you, Dylan. This is fun. I think sometimes I can get lost in some thoughts, but I appreciate the way you kept us on track.
Indeed.
I really do. And I appreciate you as a person, and I don't really know you, but I feel like I know you a little bit more.
Thank you.
That's cool for me.